well, Billy asked me to give a talk here. We had first planned this ballet, and he wanted to do some things around it. And I asked him kind of what his vision was for it, and he said that he wanted to put the ballet and our appreciation of Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe in the context of C.S. Lewis's broader thought, his philosophy, his worldview, and whatnot. And so I thought the best place to do that would be to talk out of a little underappreciated book, Experiment in Criticism. Now, how many of you guys have ever even heard of this book? A few? A few? Yeah. I feel like more people need to read this book because I love it. It is a book where C.S. Lewis takes a crack at literary criticism. He gives it an experiment, okay? And if you're going to read an author, how many of you guys remember back when you were in middle school, in high school, and the teacher asked you to look at the novel and think, you know, what is the author trying to do? What's he trying to accomplish? I think. And everybody in high school, they would groan and say, "Oh man, you know, we're just reading too much into this." Okay, we don't know what the author wanted to accomplish. All that we have is the text before us. All that we have is this book, and I don't know. I don't know what the author wants to do. Well, with C.S. Lewis, we're kind of lucky because he actually tells us what he thinks literature is all about, and what it means to be good literature, and what it means to be a good reader of literature. So by looking at experiment in criticism, we can kind of get an idea about, okay, well, when we go and we read Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe, what do you think C.S. Lewis is up to? What's he trying to accomplish? And he also describes what it means to be a good reader in this book. And so that should give us some clues, if we want to be charitable readers, to what our task is as we approach the Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, and we start thinking through, okay, what do you think C.S. Lewis would want me to be? What do you think he would want me to do as I read this book? So as I go through here, I'm going to focus mostly on the very, very last chapter in this book. And I'm going to talk about three things. The first is we're going to have to clear up what he means by imagination. The second point, we're going to look at a distinction that he draws between using literature and receiving literature. And then finally, we're going to take a close look at the last chapter and talk about how literature gets us outside of ourselves. Bridges the gap between us and other people. Okay. First, we need to clear up some confusions about imagination. In ordinary speech, when I say, "Oh, that's just your imagination," or you know, when my son is playing with me and he says, "Here, take a drink," and I say, "What drink?" And he says, "It's just pretend. It's just pretend." You know, he gets on the arm of the couch and he rides his beloved horse 730, right? You know, we say he's using his imagination. Okay. Well, what that connotes in ordinary language is that imagination is just fancy. It's mere fancy. It's the realm of unicorns and Superman and spaceships, you know, and kind of it's kind of trivial, maybe meaningless. Okay. But that's not what C.S. Lewis means. Okay. C.S. Lewis was a professor of late medieval and early Renaissance literature at both Oxford and Cambridge. Okay. And so he's steeped in a world of literature and philosophy that has a particular kind of psychology. Okay. So without getting too technical, for the Middle Ages and stretching all the way back to Aristotle, the imagination is simply a faculty that your mind has for representing things to yourself. It's what you use when you just call up an image before your mind's eye. All right, it doesn't have to be, we're going to use image language and seeing language in your mind's eye. It doesn't have to be. You could, it doesn't have to be sight. You could imagine a sound. You can imagine a song. You can play that song in your head without it really being there, right? You can imagine a smell. You can imagine the way that something would feel if you touched it, right? So think about if I just called up the image of my son's face right now. In fact, I just did that when I told the story about him climbing on the couch arm. I can picture his face pretty accurately, right? Even though he's not here. Have you ever stopped and thought about how amazing it is that you have this ability? Your mind just automatically has this faculty, this ability for representing things to yourself. And there's nothing fantastic or unreal about that image of my son's face. I take myself to be thinking of my son's face more or less as he actually is. Right? I mean, maybe there's some inaccuracy there, but it's not like I'm imagining the unicorn. Okay? He's a real thing. Right? Furthermore, you use your imagination even when you're confronted with objects right in the room with you. Okay? If you think about it, what your eyes actually sort of report to your brain is just light data, right? It's just colors, intensities of light. It's actually very, very complicated. Okay? But when I look at my son, I don't see, a patch of kind of darkish brown and a patch of sort of lightish tan and like two dark brown spots and maybe some red, That's not what I see when I see the face of my son. My mind automatically organizes all of that raw data into a coherent image, okay? For the medievals, for Aristotle, for Thomas Aquinas, what you're doing when you're organizing that is you're using your imagination, okay? You're using this faculty that your mind has for representing things to yourself. Does this make sense to everybody? Yeah? Okay. So we shouldn't limit imagination to mere fancy. Okay. Second, we need to understand what C.S. Lewis means by using literature versus receiving literature. The central, from the title where he says experiment, okay, the experiment is to try doing literary criticism by focusing on what it means to be a good reader rather than what it means to be good literature. Okay? So we want to first figure out what it means to read a book well, and then we'll go on and talk about what makes good and bad literature, rather than the normal procedure of first figuring out what are all the good books, and then defining the good readers as, oh, well, they're the sophisticated people that like all the good books, right? So, what does he think separates the good readers from the bad readers? Well, he goes through it, and he finally comes down on a distinction. He says, well, bad readers, they use literature. They exploit literature. Whereas good readers, they receive literature. Okay? What does it mean to use literature? Well, somebody who uses literature takes the story, takes the book, takes the text, whatever they have before them, and they employ it as a tool or a means to accomplishing whatever it is that they want to accomplish. Okay? So I want to relax on the beach on a Saturday afternoon and I pick up some, pulp novel. Okay? I want to distract myself, maybe, from some painful events. Or, I want to get an A in a class. I want to have the reputation as somebody who's read Great Expectations. Okay? Or actually finished War and Peace, so I'm, dutifully racing through it. Right? Mark Twain said that a classic is not something that everybody wants to read. It's a book that everybody wants to have read. Right? So if that's what you're trying to accomplish, is just attain that status of having read Brothers Karamazov or something, intellectual sounding, then you're not actually receiving the literature, you're just using it. You're employing it in the service of your own projects. Okay. The opposite of that would be to receive the literature, to allow the story to do its work, to allow the author sort of open access to your soul, so to speak, and allow him to just give you the story, and you receive it on its own terms, and you take it as something that's good for its own sake. Okay, something that's worth having for its own sake, not something that you're using to accomplish something beyond itself. Okay? So, he describes it like this. He says that when a good reader, when we as good readers read a good book, we entertain, this is a quote, we entertain various imaginations, imagined feelings, and thoughts in an order and at a tempo prescribed by the poet. Okay? So the poet, or the author here, they give you a sequence of images, scenes, dialogues, okay? And we're supposed to just follow those directions, okay? And receive those images and allow ourselves to attentively go through those steps. And at the speed, at the tempo that the author prescribes. What makes them a good author is that it's a well-orchestrated set of directions, okay? He says this isn't like receiving a good piece of visual art, like a painting or a vase or a sculpture or something like that. Because when you receive a painting, okay, even when you're not using or exploiting the painting, you're receiving it. It's sort of an all-at-once type thing, right? You just, oh yeah, there it is, the Mona Lisa, okay? Literature's a little bit different because what the author wants you to do is something that we ourselves have to actually perform. We have to actually call up the images in our mind. Now sometimes this happens fairly automatically, right? I mean, if I start describing to you in detail a chocolate chip cookie, and I say it's nice and warm, and it's gooey, and it's big, you know, you start imagining it pretty quickly, right? But some of the images in literature, you have to actually take some effort to call up and put before you in your mind. Okay. So he says it's not, this is a quote, it is less like looking at a vase than doing exercises under an expert's direction or taking part in a choric dance invented by a good choreographer. Okay? So what you can imagine is that the author is like a choreographer who has composed a sequence of movements for your imagination to go through, a dance for your imagination to go through. And as you read the good literature, the receptive good reader takes those movements and actually obeys the instructions. Okay? And this is a really good thing if the author is good, because what you accomplish then is beautiful. Okay? Can you imagine, we're putting on a ballet, okay? Can you imagine Sarah, the director of the ballet, composing and choreographing this whole dance? And then we have some dancers that get on the stage and they're just here for the exercise, right? They're using dance to get some exercise, which is not a bad thing, right? I mean, exercise is good. We like exercise, right? But they get up on that stage, and rather than, maybe they start off following Sarah's instructions, because it seems like good exercise, but then she has them just, okay, now I want you guys to go off to the side and just stand still for a little while these other dancers do their thing. And they say, well, that's not good exercise. This isn't accomplishing my purposes. Okay, so I'm going to keep on, you know, I'm going to jog in place while I'm there. I'm going to, you know, that would ruin the whole dance, right? No longer are they actually doing the ballet that Sarah has choreographed, right? They're doing their own thing. And they might have used some of Sarah's movements at certain times when it was convenient for them, okay? But they're not going to fit in to the overall beautiful dance that Sarah has choreographed. Does this make sense to you guys? Okay. Now, the next thing that we want to notice about imagination, okay, is that when you represent things in your imagination, they can have a powerful impact on your psychology. A lot of what we desire, a lot of our motivations stem from what we entertain in our imaginations. Okay, Dallas Willard makes this point at great length in Renovation of the Heart. But just take a simple example, okay? If I'm driving home and I'm preoccupied with what I'm going to teach at Asbury tomorrow, okay? I might have in the back of my mind sort of the abstract, latent knowledge that I like chocolate chip cookies, right? Okay, I mean, who doesn't? If you called me up on the phone and said, hey, do you like chocolate chip cookies? I would immediately say yes without even thinking about it. Okay? But it's not present to my mind as I'm driving. Okay? And as a result, I don't really desire at that moment chocolate chip cookies. It's not moving me hardly at all. Right? But now pretend that my wife calls me up on the phone and said, oh, hey, I just got this new recipe for chocolate chip cookies. There's this secret in Cook's Illustrated magazine, okay, where you can make extra big, extra thick cookies, and it keeps the consistency, you know, just nice and at that perfect kind of gooey consistency. And I made a batch, and they'll still be warm when you get home. And I mean, I'm looking at them right now, and you can tell the butter looks great. I mean, the chocolate chips and the butterscotch chips are still just slightly melted. You know, and ooh, I broke one open. How many of you guys are starting to desire some chocolate chip cookies right now? Right? I mean, just by entertaining it in your imagination, by putting it before your mind, it begins to connect with the whole machinery of the rest of your psychology. Okay? When you weren't entertaining the image in your mind, there was no desire, there was no motivation, there was no feeling. Okay? But just by holding it in your mind with greater and greater levels of detail and vividness, it begins to have some oomph in your psychology. Right? Consider, for instance, these two different descriptions. Description 1. God is really powerful. You probably already knew that. Description 2. Smoke went up from his nostrils and devouring fire from his mouth. Glowing coals flamed forth from him. Out of the brightness before him, hailstones and coals of fire broke through his clouds. The Lord also thundered in the heavens, and the Most High uttered his voice. Hailstones and coals of fire. Okay. Now the second description, the theoretical content of it is much the same as the first description, right? I mean, what it says, more or less, is God's really, really powerful, right? But by calling to mind very specific, detailed images, we begin to form something. We begin to represent that power before our mind's eye in a detailed and vivid way, okay? And the second one has a lot more oomph to it than the first, doesn't it? Right? And it begins to activate the whole machinery of our dispositions and our emotions and our motives and our drives. Right? So there's this connection between representing something before your imagination and getting your psychology into it. Okay? So what does that mean as we receive good literature? Right? We're not just skimming over it, we're not just reading it to pass the time. Okay, but we're attending to it and allowing these images to really form full force in our mind. Well, that's going to have an impact on our whole psychology, right? Okay, last point. Talking about getting outside of ourselves. C.S. Lewis has this worry. He says, okay, well, if what a good reader is supposed to do is allow the author to sort of take them through this dance, do we really want to go through dances where the choreographer is a pagan, is perhaps an immoral person? Do I really want to attend closely to the poems of D.H. Lawrence, for instance? What about if I just don't even believe some of the presuppositions of the author in question? So he talks about Dante. He's like, look, I'm not a Thomist, so my view of the universe isn't very much like Dante's picture of heaven and hell and purgatory. Okay? So do I really want to allow D.H. Lawrence or Dante to orchestrate the movements of my mind? Is that even healthy? Okay. So he asks this question. He says, what then is the good of, what is even the defense for, occupying our hearts with stories of what never happened, and entering vicariously into feelings which we should try to avoid having in our own person, or fixing our inner eye earnestly on things that can never exist, on Dante's earthly paradise, Thetis rising from the sea to comfort Achilles, Sheffler's or Spencer's Lady Nature, or the mariner's skeleton ship. The nearest I have come to an answer is that we seek an enlargement of our being. We want to be more than ourselves. Each of us, by nature, sees the whole world from one point of view, with a perspective and a selectiveness peculiar to ourselves. But we want to see with other eyes, to imagine with other imaginations, to feel with other hearts as well as with our own. So why would we read D.H. Lawrence? Why would we read Dante? Why would we read Rime of the Ancient Mariner? Who is it? Coleridge. Why would we read Coleridge? Okay, I mean, he was kind of messed up, right? You know, his answer is, well, we want an enlargement of our being. We don't want to just see the things that we've already seen and see from the perspective that we already have. We want to get outside of ourselves. We want to see more of the world than is available from right here. Okay. I once knew, saying no is probably a stretch. My mother had a hairdresser in Lebanon, Kentucky. Okay. Lebanon, Kentucky, anybody know where that is? It's like right in the very middle of the state. Okay. Oh yeah. Hopefully she's not this hairdresser. Say something rather uncommon. But Marion County, okay, Lebanon, Kentucky only has about 10,000 people in it, or it did a number of years ago. I think the whole county has something like 25,000. It's a pretty rural patch of Kentucky. Okay. This hairdresser had never left the county. She was like 32 years old, had never in her life left the county. Okay. She hadn't even been to the nearest movie theater. There's not a movie theater, or at least there wasn't a few years ago, in Marion County. You had to drive to Bardstown, which is about, I don't know, 5-6 miles away. And she had never even been to a movie theater. She was outside the county. Okay, I don't know, probably not because it was outside the county. She just didn't get out. Okay. So you can imagine this woman's whole world, whole conception is limited to that county. Okay, that was her experience of life. The only mountains or hills she had ever seen were those very peculiar central Kentucky knobs. Okay, the only woods she had ever seen were those woods. Okay, can you imagine how much her literal life experience would expand if we just plopped her right in the middle of Egypt? Okay, had her live with some, nomads in the deserts for a little while. Okay, that would more than double her conception of life. Okay, the stock of her experience. Okay, well, here's what Lewis has to say about literature. He says, those of us who have been true readers all our life seldom fully realize the enormous extension of our being, which we owe to authors. We realize it best when we talk with an unliterary friend. He may be full of goodness and good sense, but he inhabits a tiny world. In it we should be suffocated. The man who is contented to be only himself, and therefore less a self, is in prison. My own eyes are not enough for me. I will see through those of others. Reality, even seen through the eyes of many, is not enough. I will see what others have invented. Okay? So we have this problem without literature of being trapped inside ourselves, trapped inside of our own experience. And one of the things that a good story does is it gets us out of that prison. Okay? He says, literary experience heals the wound without undermining the privilege of individuality. There are mass emotions which heal the wound, but they destroy the privilege. In them, our separate selves are pooled and we sink back into sub-individuality. But in reading great literature, I become 1,000 men and yet remain myself. Like the night sky in the Greek poem. I see with a myriad eyes, but it is still I who see. Here, as in worship, in love, in moral action, and in knowing, I transcend myself and am never more myself than when I do. Okay? So that last line there, I think, is pretty important. Lewis does not think that literature is the only way to get outside of yourself, or is it even the best way to get outside of yourself. He mentions, first of all, love. Okay, in a love relationship, we necessarily have to step outside of ourselves and our own limited perspective and take up the other person in a significant way. In moral action, he says, you have to stop thinking about just your own interests and, in a sense, transcend that and think about the interests of all, or just what is good, full stop, not just what's good for me. Okay? And finally, in knowing, okay, to actually know something rather than to merely have an opinion, you have to transcend your own limited perspective and start to think about what holds, what's valid universally. Okay? But nevertheless, even though literature is perhaps not the best way to get outside of yourself, it does present a unique way of getting outside of yourself because it operates on your imagination. Okay? In ways that these other avenues do not. So finally, to end, I want to consider one way in which I think this is very important when we read Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, or even when you come and see the ballet. Okay. Most people, I think, have a very limited conception of Jesus Christ. Okay. We have to realize that no matter who you are, God is always bigger than your experience of God. Okay. Often I talk to people who aren't Christians, and they gripe and they tell me all the reasons why you shouldn't believe in this Jesus Christ fellow and why he isn't God. And very often at the end of their soapbox, I have to say, yeah, I would reject that guy too, right? That guy's not God. Whatever it is that you're describing, that certainly can't be God. You are right. Because their conception, when they say Jesus, what they have in mind, what they represent to themselves, okay, isn't Jesus. It's a very limited, it's a very shadowy, facile thing. Okay. The real Jesus is often much bigger, and if they could just even conceive of that for a half second, I think it would be much more plausible. Okay. Even Christians, most Christians, I think they have a pretty shallow conception of who God is based on their own experience. Okay. And often they form for themselves conceptions of Jesus that confirm in them the desires of their own flesh. Okay. Or excuse in them things that they can't overcome. Okay. But that's not who Jesus is. He's more than the idol you set up for yourself and then call it Jesus, right? And so I think one, obviously the very best way to get out of this is to actually meet Jesus Christ face to face, right? That's the real way to avoid this danger, is actually come to know God. But I think another avenue, a far inferior avenue, but one that shouldn't be despised therefore, is to read other people's experience of God, right? To open yourself up, to receive different perspectives, okay, on who God is. And I think particularly in literature and in fiction, fiction, we can allow that to operate on our imagination and to operate on our emotions and our drives in ways that perhaps we couldn't invent for ourselves. Okay? So I think Aslan is a really great example of exactly this. Aslan is an imaginative conception of Jesus Christ in a certain way. And in a lot of ways, he's not actually just literally Jesus. But he represents, or he points to Jesus in a very particular way. Okay? And the image of a lion, of his power, of his mane, of his smell, of the way that he roars, okay? That does something to your imagination, and it calls up emotions and drives that perhaps you could not have called up for yourself without C.S. Lewis's help. Okay. So I just think that this is a nice case study of what we've been talking about. If rather than using or exploiting Narnia, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, to pass a pleasant afternoon, and rather allowing yourself to receive the dance instructions that C.S. Lewis has for your imagination, I think it does something really good for your soul. All right. I think we have a few minutes for questions.